I'd like to welcome to the Disaster Recovery as a Service EcoCast today, Mr. Pat O'Day, who is the CTO of Bluelock. And Pat, I do see your slides.
All right.
All right, so take it away, Pat. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks, David. Thanks, Natasha. Hello, everyone. Pat O'Day, I'm the CTO and one of the founders at Bluelock. We've actually been providing disaster recovery services in the cloud now for 10 years. We're actually going to celebrate our 10th anniversary this summer, so we're pretty excited about that. I wanted to talk to you about our clients because I think that's the best way to tell our story and really figure out if they match the scenarios that you're running into, and some of the situations that they're in might resonate with the situation that you're in today in terms of your confidence around your ability to recover. If there'd be an event, a lot of weather-related talk, but also, as you saw, the majority of events that happen aren't really related to that. So how do our clients think? Well, what they tell us is that they have to prove that their disaster recovery will work. And they usually have to prove that to somebody outside of IT. So to an end customer or client of theirs that's asking, their board of directors. We've had clients come in who aren't able to get an insurance rate or a premium that they want. Obviously, regulation is increasing. A lot of that in healthcare. We'll talk about that more later, and et cetera, so on. But somebody outside of the organization is asking questions. And the plan that you might have in place or the last test that you did aren't really sufficient to pass muster when exposed to that scrutiny. Our clients demand a superior service experience, and the way they've told us that we do it is through a culture of partnership. We actually become an extension of their recovery team. So whether you have one person on your team today dedicated to recovery, or maybe it's just part of someone's job, or you have a whole squad of people, we actually become part of that team. They tend to work in industries where security around the data and a lot of times the availability application is seen as a security event. So the DR environment needs to be as secure as production or better. And I think Ken pointed out there are smarter intruders out there that know that your DR environment is probably less secure than production, so they target it explicitly. There are no new dollars in disaster recovery and backup and data protection, so you've got to get extreme value. So what we believe we do is we give you a lot more for those dollars than what you got with the solution that you have today, or maybe something that you put in 5 or 10 years ago. Our clients also have really complex environments. The networks tend to be complex, the security requirements tend to be complex, the systems tend to be tied together with lots of application dependencies, and they're all living with the data centers that they've built over the last 10 or 15 years, which as much as we wanted to get to 100% virtual, most people didn't get there. They got to maybe 50, 60%. So you end up with a hodgepodge of physical, virtual, modern, and even maybe some legacy systems like some IBM or Sun environments that are out there. And that all has to be protected. Our clients also are very aware that technology drives their business. So today, the stories we're going to talk about are a wealth management firm, a bank, an airline, a large law firm, an auto retailer, and a healthcare system. And so hopefully, I'm going to tease out a particular differentiating point about each story, and hopefully those things will resonate with you. The other thing that's interesting is just in the last few months, it's become more clear what they're choosing us over in terms of their alternatives. So whether it's the big traditional providers, maybe they call it the easier technology providers because you're already a VMware customer, why not use the VMware environment? We're a large VMware customer ourselves, but sometimes people think it's easy just to replicate to the cloud and go platform to platform, or more and more people are choosing to do this as a service over doing it themselves. And often this isn't the first thing their organization has done as a service. They might have gone to Office 365 already. They might have gone to Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow, and they've gotten comfortable with that model. They know that it brings more than cost. It brings all the operational components that allows them to focus on other things. There's more value there. And then disaster recovery seems like a logical next thing to do as a service. Our solutions, we're not going to talk a lot about these today because I want you to understand how clients use our environment, but this is something we can dive into later if you have some specific interest. But we have 3 platform environments. We have an always-on environment. It's basically you can recover in minutes or seconds. It's always on, highly available. We have real-time environment, so if you need to recover in an hour or a few hours or less. And then we have more of a backup restore environment for applications that can survive being offline for a few days. And that's all about balancing the right amount of cost and value to fit the greatest solution you can put into the budget that you already have. It also helps you communicate to your business, because when you explain that you have these 3 choices and the costs that are associated with that, you can help them align their application into the right bucket instead of you making a decision on their behalf that, might turn out to be too expensive and people get upset about that, or maybe you try to save money and you put a business unit at more risk than they were comfortable with. Seems like IT is always getting in trouble for things like that. Now you can put the onus on the business with this approach. The other thing is that clients are raving about our customer experience. So we call this the BLX, the Bluelock Experience. And if you don't know what Net Promoter is, this is the likelihood that someone will actually refer you to someone, a trusted peer of theirs. So in other words, they're going to extend their reputation on the vendor's behalf to someone that they know and trust. And we're scoring very highly there. We're also regarded fairly highly by the analyst community. We are in the leadership, or the innovators quadrant with the highest ability to execute. So what we're trying to bring is a disruptive approach to do this differently, but also by executing very highly, you know that it's going to work. One of the challenges, and you're going to hear a little bit about this today, is there's some great new technology out there. There's some tools that simply didn't exist a few years ago that make the ability to move data, secure data, recover data a lot better. And I'm excited about the Zerto presentation that you're going to hear after me. That's a big part of our solution. And it's an amazing technology. If you haven't actually taken a look at it, Josh is going to run you through it. But it's also about people and process, because no matter what you do to technology, if the people and process are not worked out or orchestrated into your solution, they could be the ones that fail down. You could have the greatest technology in the world, and if the person in charge of recovering your environment is in Cabo on vacation that week, it's not going to work. If you have a process that requires somebody to approve a database from a QA standpoint, that data is intact before you release it out to the environment, and that adds 3 hours to your RTO, obviously the fact that the technology can get it done in 15 minutes isn't going to help you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what do I mean when they say they have to prove it to others? So one of our clients is a major law firm. They've got over 1,000 attorneys that have to keep working no matter what happens with the systems. And as you can imagine, in the modern law firm, it's very technology driven, lots of iPads, iPhones, Android devices, laptops, all interacting with data and systems all day long. Their challenge was they needed to be able to prove this to work because one of their clients was asking. One of their clients said, hey, we depend on you guys for everything that we do. We run mergers and acquisitions, all these processes through you. And if for some reason we weren't able to get to the data, our entire world would come to a stop. So you have to prove to us that you have a solution in place that's going to work. You've got to be able to offer a certified test every 6 months, et cetera, so on. So we started to walk through it with them, and this is pretty typical. What you'll see out there is people will take different tiers of data protection, just like I showed you before, and they all have different RTOs, RPOs, et cetera, so on. Let's maybe use words like this that are a little simpler to understand: mission critical, high impact applications, business supporting applications, and they'll start to break their environment down and figure out what to protect there. So as we walk through that process, we realized that they were going to set the expectation to that customer about how quickly their environment could come back based on technology. And that was going to be a huge mistake. So we educated them on two things: recovery waves and true RTO. So recovery waves and true RTO take into account not only the technology's ability to bring your environment back, but the people and process components. So if you break this out here, you can actually see, and this is Zerto for us today. Remember, this is an always-on hot environment, and this is a Zerto environment. You can see that if you have 50 or 100 applications in this tier, all protected effectively by Zerto, and you can power those up in 15 minutes or so, the people that are involved in the process to do QA, figure out network issues, open up firewalls, make sure that users know the applications are on, can't happen in 15 minutes. And by the way, that team that's busy doing that entire process is probably tied up even though the VMs are recovering in the background. So we broke this down into two waves. And you can see this process gets even further. So if you go back here, the original RTO for this was going to be 4 hours or less with their QA process, but the reality is it's going to be more like 8 when you stretch it out. Same thing with tier 3. This is more of a backup and recovery tier. They thought they could bring the data back in 16 hours, but this team's probably going to be beat. The processes aren't there, and they're going to be troubleshooting all these other issues that came up, bringing 50 or 100 applications back. So the true expectation they set to the business was 24 hours, even on that low tier, the expectation from the technology was more like 16. And obviously it just keeps going. Things that were supposed to come back that same day, now they're saying it might take more than a day. I don't know about you, but in the middle of this process, I'm planning on sleeping after, doing 16 hours worth of work so that I can not make mistakes when I wake up and start recovering systems again. The other thing that we had to do was give them something that they could give to their client to prove that the recovery was even tested and that it worked. So there's two things we did. In our portal, you actually can see in real time your recovery health. You can make sure your cost is in alignment with budget. So if your environment grew, the last thing you want to happen is that your bill is just going to go up for no reason. Or if it's going to go up for a good reason because you did expand your environment, you did have applications, you can communicate that to the CFO or the CEO or whoever is the right person in your organization to make sure that they know it's coming and why. And then when your last test was done and whether or not it was successful. The other thing we wanted to make sure is that they could download their latest test certificate that's actually signed off by both organizations. And that's the proof that they need to be able to give to a third party that the environment is actually going to work the way that they expected. So setting the right expectation around RTO, including people, process, and technology, and then being able to certify the solution were the key things for them to prove that it works. Our clients also demand a superior service experience. So we worked with a wealth management firm, and their issue was very similar. Their end clients were requiring them to have a DR solution. Their existing IT team was focused on growing the organization, so opening up new offices, migrating everybody to SaaS applications, and things like that. So they didn't have time to really focus on getting the DR piece done. And they had 2 months to turn the entire solution around. And again, I'm not talking about install some tools and move some data. I'm talking about the whole thing all the way to certification. So what we showed them was the recovery assurance milestones that we have. So if you look at a typical solution, at some point you're going to order it, you're going to buy it, you're going to sign something and execute a contract. And that's all the classic pieces, right? There's service levels, scope of the project, any legal that you might have to do. But the minute that's done, you get a team. Now our teams range in anywhere from 3 to 10 people that are assigned to your environment to make this project work. We'll talk a little bit about the members of that team here in a minute, but they instantly went from one person who had an hour or two to focus on this a week to 3 people that were focused full-time on getting their implementation done. Through the implementation process, they got value immediately because at this point, we had a copy of all of the data. Oops, sorry. So once we have a copy of all the data, if they did have an event at that moment, they could recover. It probably won't happen in the RTO timeframe that they want, but it is possible because we've never tried it before. They've never tried it before. At this point, we've actually done the test the first time. We test twice during the implementation, and this is where we've taken everything we think about how the application should work, how the network should work, how the security should work, the QA that we think is the right process to run, and we've tried it for the first time. These are usually about 90% right. So we drive all that content into the playbook, and we take the 10% of things that didn't work, we factor them into the next test, and then we run the certified test, which you can see we actually have a 100% test certification rate on the second test. And that takes into all the exceptions and lessons learned when we tried that first initial failover. The other challenge they had was, and you guys probably understand this, some people have a person who will do project management as part of their role when they have to. Some companies have a single project manager that might want to run this whole process because you have a capability there. Other companies have project management resources, but they would really rather dedicate them to that Salesforce migration or the Office 365 migration that they're doing. So we're able to provide the whole PMO organization as part of this if that's what you need. And that's just part of what we do. It's not at an extra cost. And as you can see, we're able to either offer you the framework to use as you go through this process. Most people haven't done this before, so that's useful, or we can operate it for you. And that's all the way from kickoff all the way into operations. We also use a RACI framework because one of the biggest issues in a collaborative project like this is who's responsible for what. So that applies not only to the implementation, but to the operations and the recovery. So this RACI chart, and the names are missing here, but you can imagine the names are over here. It actually explains who is responsible for what part of all of the entire process so that we know who's doing what. We also built a collaborative extranet. So one of the challenges we had before was a lot of people weren't sure where the project was delayed or who was supposed to do what or what documentation we were waiting on. And a lot of it was being done through email. Obviously that wasn't going to scale. So we built this extranet and we collaborate with your team. Sometimes it's us driving 90% of the work. Sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes the client is running the majority of the show, and then they're just interacting with us through this when we need to share documents and work on things like the Gantt chart in terms of the timeline to make sure that we get everything done. Or if you need to come in here really quickly and show your boss the milestones and where the project's at, you can do that as well. One thing, as you can imagine, based on the types of clients that we work with, is that they require DR to be secure as production or better. So we'll talk about two clients here and how they looked at security. So we supported a major healthcare system, and their issue with DR was their business was hitting a tipping point around growth, and the IT just couldn't stomach the risk of having all these dependencies on their systems running the entire hospital, and particularly the ER and the neonatal unit, that not having an effective DR solution was kind of driving crazy and keeping them up at night. They also had a contract renewal coming up on their second data center location, and they didn't want to stay in the data center business, at least not for the secondary site. So they wanted an as-a-service solution. But as most of you know, because there's personally identifiable information in healthcare, there's a HIPAA regulation, and from an IT perspective, there's a more specific HIPAA regulation called HIPAA High-Tech that tells you how to protect those environments and how DR should actually work. So we did something kind of cool. As a service provider company, we have SSA Type 2 SOC 2 certification in our facilities, and we actually have one facility that's even SOC 3 certified. We actually extended that certification to include all of our HIPAA high-tech controls, because right now HIPAA doesn't offer a certification process for the IT controls that are in there. So we thought, well, what we really need is proof and evidence around what this compliance is. Let's use the certification that everybody already trusts, and we'll just put this in as an addendum. And it worked wonderfully. So you can't see it here, but there's 7 pages of HIPAA high-tech controls that are actually certified by our third-party accounting firm. We also worked with a major regional bank. Their issue was really fascinating to me because their application was fairly small, but it was their main website. And they realized that everybody came to their website in order to get to their online banking, which was actually run by a third party. So if the website had an issue, if it was hacked, if it was defaced, if it was offline, everybody thought the bank and all the banking systems were wiped out, which wasn't true. So they needed a DR solution that was secure, but also high RTO that could keep that confidence high amongst their customer base as they transition through the website to the third-party hosted banking environment. They didn't really have a set of IT controls from an audit standpoint, so they decided, hey, HIPAA High-Tech is actually pretty solid. You've already got it audited. We're not in healthcare, but we think our data is pretty secure and maybe even more important than what the hospitals worry about. So, because it involves money. So we're just going to leverage the HIPAA High-Tech feature set. The other thing they were worried about, because it was about keeping the website online, was denial of service, data corruption, and data leakage into their environment. So we enable all those features to protect them because they are a more public-facing application than maybe what a hospital or a healthcare system might have that's mostly behind a firewall. So as I mentioned before, everybody's living within budget constraints. The world is changing, and it's not necessarily about buying something that you've already got for less money. It's about spending the same allocation you have to protect your environment, but getting a lot more value out of it. Hopefully you've already seen some ways that our clients are getting more value out of their spend, but here are a few more. So we had a Fortune 500 auto retailer. It's one of those conglomerates, I guess you could call it, where they run a lot of dealerships, even though the dealerships all have their own independent names in your market. Their issue was they were starting to grow a lot based on revenue, and they were going to be the first company to actually sell cars online. So if you think about CarMax today, you can shop for cars online, but you can't actually execute the sale. These guys are going to make that happen. So as they started to think about what that meant when literally technology was going to be supporting this small at the beginning, but potentially half of their revenue in the future, their definition of RTO and DR became quite a bit different. They wanted to be in a secure environment. Our Las Vegas data center is actually based in the Switch SuperNAP. If you guys are familiar with that, it's the only Tier 4 gold rated data center facility in the world. So they were already going to put an investment there, and they really wanted to control their security and their network front end. They had a pretty extensive capability there. They had a team that was really comfortable with that, but they wanted the back end to be run by a DR service provider. So what you can see here is they actually put their entire network front end and their MPLS network is attached to our cloud service in the Switch SuperNAP data center. So they got the best of both worlds. They got all the as a service, only pay for what you use, everything that we talked about before. But when it came to the pieces that they really want to have total control over and really not spend more money on, we were able to take care of that as well. What you'll hear from us is a lot of our solutions incorporate Zerto, but in some cases, we'll talk about one here in just a minute, where they had an application that wasn't virtual, so we had to protect it using another tool. But that's our whole goal is to meet our clients where they are, knowing that there are a lot of things in their data center and their architecture that they can't change, but provide them a path to the future so that as they're ready or as more applications can embrace it, they can keep going. The other thing is we wanted to make sure that these folks could always see what their status was, and as I mentioned before, keep an eye on their cost. So if you want to know exactly how much an application's costing, let's say you've got a standard fixed budget, you've got a line of business application that maybe you spent some money on to protect at the beginning, you've got a mission critical application you might want to spend a little bit more money on, your ability to slice and dice and move that around. You can see kind of in the middle here, we've got a portal that does all of that for you. So final thing here is our customers tend to have really complex environments. So virtual, physical, modern, legacy systems, and a lot of times they're tied together. So as much as they might say, I would love to just install one tool to replicate my VM somewhere else, they can't protect their environment with just that approach. So as I mentioned before, we use Zerto a lot. In certain situations, though, it won't necessarily protect the environment. So that's what we had. So we had an airline that we serve today, and they actually have a system. It's almost all virtual. We protected all of that with Zerto, And then we had this one system that it turns out has to check with the TSA no-fly list, compare that to the passenger manifest when a plane's door is closed, and if they get a hit on the no-flight list, then the planes can't take off. So that's a pretty important freaking system. It just happened to be physical and, running on a non-VM. The other issue was that if that system wasn't able to talk to the TSA database, none of the planes could go in the air. So it became really important. So they had all these VMs and Windows systems that sort of surrounded it and made it work, but this system was actually based on a pervasive database, which I'll date myself, but back in the network days, it was called btrieve. It's been around forever. And it works in a certain way. It doesn't understand block level replication, doesn't understand transaction integrity, and it has a real issue with how the services have to start up after the fact. So we actually went in and protected that one system with double take, even though 90% of the rest of the environment was protected with Zerto, and we put it all behind the same control panel that you see today. The other thing that they were worried about was the testing. So in their environment, they had to have really clear testing. So we took our project management team, and they need to be able to go back to their executives and prove that if this no-fly system was ever in jeopardy, that they knew what the risk was, but also when the next test was going to go on, because oftentimes, even though we can test anytime, we test for tons of people every week, the real issue is they've got to start planning so that their team has time several weeks, if not months, in advance. So we have this master schedule that we expose with them to figure that out. The other thing is, if you look at that system, the pervasive database, it's one thing to install another technology and just make it replicate, but the real issue is how do you operate it like everything else? How do you take this kind of foreign system and run it as if it was normal? So we actually have what we call the tailored service process. Anytime we run into an environment that's complex, this is what we run into. You guys will never see it. We're just going to ask you questions, but this is what happens on the back end. It then becomes a tailored service that has a number. We've actually done 17 of these in the last 3 months, and they're all tracked inside of a system here. So you can see we've got all kinds of things. We've got Oracle appliances, MySQL database monitoring, got the pervasive database. Somebody wanted us to manage part of their backup environment as part of the solution to transition them into the future, things like that. That's all cool, right? Anybody can sort of document, and maybe some people call it custom and whatnot. But the reality is translating that into the order of operations of the environment so that you know what to do when there's actually an event. So we're able to take all that complex data because we run it as an application and drive it into the recovery playbook. So you can see here, they've actually got the Zerto environment and the double take environment are all identified in the same playbook, and we run through the whole order of operations on their behalf to get that done. So I know I covered a lot of ground, but hopefully what you took away from the session today is that our clients in particular, and this may not fit everybody, have to prove that it works to somebody else, customers, boards, insurers, regulators, executives, require it to be secure, as production or better, need extreme value because the budget around DR is not getting any bigger, demand a superior service experience, and really a culture of partnership and collaboration because we do become part of your IT team, and that their environments are complex. They're working with the data center they have. They may dream and want to get to a different place that's a lot easier to work with, but the reality is we need to meet you with where you are now.
Excellent presentation, Pat. Are you ready for some Q&A from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So we've got quite a few questions coming in. If you haven't asked a question yet and you have something on your mind, now's the time to put it in the GoToWebinar Q&A box there, and I'll be queuing up these questions for Pat. So, Pat, for one thing I got from your presentation is that Bluelock has a lot of different service offerings. It's not just we replicate virtual machines. It's not just you buy infrastructure and put it in our data center. Can you kind of tell us what are the different service offerings, or is it very custom? Is it tailor-made to the needs of your customers?
It's a great question, David. So what we call it internally is tailored on standard. So obviously it's to our benefit to operate these environments with confidence, and also to provide cost and value and call it seamless integration, the more standard these things are. But we also realize that every data center we run into has a complex requirement that may not match the clients that we've served before. And I'd love to tell you that in 3 years, I predict that we'll have 90% of that attack surface covered, and that everything we see will have seen 10 times before. But the reality is doing this as a service with a cloud-based environment and working with data centers that were really designed to just run inside their own firewalls over the last 10 years, we've got to be flexible. But our goal is to be flexible, take in what you've got. If we can upgrade you to something more modern and you have room in your priority list and your budget to do that, we're with you. Most people have, call it 60–80% modern systems, but they're dealing with a lot of things that they can't necessarily change, at least not in the same time frame in which they need to improve their availability strategy.
Right, gotcha. So, I mean, in my mind, I kind of equate it almost to like you're looking to buy a new house to move into for your family. You don't just go out and say, I want to buy a house, and you buy a house off the shelf. I mean, there's different types of, home builders out there, all the way from, here's our house to, extremely custom. And what I'm hearing, but no matter what, you still don't just buy a house. There's a lot to talk about: where it is, the size it is, the cost, the features, everything. And so what I'm hearing is that that's kind of how you treat disaster recovery. It's not just we do DR. Here's the price for it. It's, let's talk about it. Let's figure out what you need and find a solution that fits your company the best.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our goal.
Okay, great. So can you kind of walk us through, the process? If someone came to you and said, hey, we need help with DR, kind of walk us through what would it be like? Do you have someone to help them plan it, execute it, and then the maintenance and administration of that after? How does all that flow?
Yeah, great question. So we typically run into one of two scenarios. So I don't know if everyone knows what a BIA is, but a BIA is a business impact analysis. And this is something you can do on your own. This is something you can go to a consulting firm and have done, or there are even some templates on the internet on how to do it, and we can help you do it as well. But a business impact analysis helps you understand, and this is typically, you're working with the business to understand this, how to take the business processes in your organization that are supported by applications and technology and prioritize them, as well as the risk if those would have an availability issue. We run into companies who've already had that done, and it's sort of part of their institutional thinking already. We run into companies where that might be a new concept, or maybe they're aware of what it is, they just haven't actually had an opportunity to go and do it yet. So that's the first place we start. The byproduct of that is you end up with a pretty good understanding of what those most important, most essential business-driven or technology-driven business initiatives are that are out there. And that's where we start to build the DR plan around, because typically most people can start a conversation with the C-level or the executive team about that application, and everybody will understand. But the reality is you need to protect the whole business. So as we start with that one sort of cornerstone building block, we then start to layer all the other applications into the approach.
Okay, excellent. What about, there's a question here about, replication. What are your most common tools or systems you use to get data from the company's primary data center to your protected data center?
Yeah, good question as well. So we have, certainly if you're on a hypervisor today, there are tools like Zerto that do an amazing job replicating data at the hypervisor level. So we use that a lot for virtual environments. Almost every environment we have has a pretty heavy VMware or virtual component to it. So that works really well. The other thing we run into is a lot of physical environments. And those physical environments can be x86 based, or they can not be x86 based. So typically we're taking a tool like DoubleTake into the x86 world. Sometimes we use Commvault for that. We tend to work with whatever tools they have there because they've already got a data protection technology in place to back that stuff up. Why not extend it if you can accomplish the RTO into your recovery solution and save some money? That's also the same thing we see with the non-x86 systems is there's usually a tool there backing that environment up. They may even be replicating it, just not far enough away or not fast enough. So we'll lean into that as well. And if people don't have ideas on that, we go back into our client base and say, well, this is what we did for so-and-so. Maybe this is something that would work for your legacy system as well.
Okay. So it's all very custom, really. I mean, you provide disaster recovery and you do it however it fits the customer best, really.
I think that the solution looks that way. What we deliver from a platform standpoint is very standardized. So the software that I showed you, the control panels, the views, the way you're able to manipulate the environment, that's standard. It's just, it might be, you might be moving data one way for this application, you might be moving data this way for another application based on your needs, but yet the way that you're working with our environment and the recovery process is the same.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, so you have a standard, essentially disaster recovery dashboard. I mean, it's not just like, well, here's a binder with all the instructions on how to recover, and here's the 12 different places to go to look to figure out what's going on. You have this dashboard that helps them, gain visibility that they need on a daily basis to know that everything is how it should be, and to take action when it's not.
Yeah, and the testing works that way as well, and so does the playbook, which is really the heart of how you actually manage an event. It goes through that as well. It talks about the applications in terms of their priority. That's how we recover the environment. But what you'll see is there are multiple technologies typically in one environment, and it may not be just the replication. It may be how the security needs to work, that the firewall, the IPS, the VPN tunnels, and the data leakage protection device all need to be turned on before you open up public access to this particular application.
Okay. And what about RPOs and RTOs and recovery waves?
Yeah, so specifically, was that the question literally?
Well, yeah, that was the question. I mean, what I'm picturing here is, companies have different applications with different levels of criticality, so they might have some tier one applications that require, this RTO and less critical applications with longer, RTOs. How do you kind of handle that and manage that? And do you use different tools to accomplish different RTOs?
Yeah, we absolutely do. So it's typically a balance between the RTO and the cost, right? So in some cases, it's a technology barrier because you might have a really high RTO, but you can't necessarily make that RTO happen with the particular type of system that you have. So I'll give you two examples just really quickly. So we work with a health insurance company out of Seattle, and they came in and they were really excited about all the modern hypervisor-based replication. They'd seen some demos, they were super excited. And as they were working through the process, we realized that they hadn't actually included their IBM systems team in the conversation because they were worried that those folks would slow everything down. That's okay. So that was cool until we figured out that all the data warehouse was actually in the IBM environment. It wasn't on any of the virtual systems. Those all just talked to the IBM environment. So when we went and looked at that and we thought, okay, well, how are you going to do that? We realized that they actually had Commvault in their environment. They were backing it all up that way. So we started the conversation of, well, we can get you to this modern place where you have really aggressive RTO, call it, less than 2 hours, or, and that's the whole process, the RTO, not just the technology, or you can leverage what you have, protect the IBM system as well, and everything will be together, but your RTO is going to be more like 24 hours. And they said for where they're at today, because this is such a huge improvement, they want to get to the sub 2 hour environment over the next year or two. But what they would get a huge improvement out of would be to leverage the investments they've already made and get a real RTO of 24 hours with a system that was hosted somewhere else. We had kind of similar but opposite scenario where we had a company come in and they said, hey, we've got about 150 virtual systems. We need to protect them all. We don't have a very big budget. So we're thinking, 3 or 4 days would be cool. Let's put it all back there. But we've got this handful of systems that we'd really like to protect Zerto with. So we're going to prioritize those a little higher. And I call that 30 or 40 VMs because all those applications were tied together. And as we started to expose to them what the situation would actually look like and how easy it would be to include all their VMs in the Zerto solution, they got pretty excited, and it turned out they could actually afford that. So they promoted everything from tier 3 up into tier 2, and now they now have a 2 to 4 hour RTO. We broke it into waves, 1 and 2, but basically some applications come back in 2 hours or less, some applications come back in 4 hours or less. So they actually got a pretty big lift up based on being able to go to a modern solution because they were all virtual.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm sure there's so many benefits to moving to a virtual infrastructure and getting rid of those physical servers if it's possible. I know it's not always possible. And a question here is about Zerto specifically. You mentioned when someone wants to use Zerto through Bluelock, do they purchase Zerto separately, or is that something they purchase through Bluelock? How's that managed?
You can do it either way. So depending on how your organization works and what your preference might be, we can provide it as part of the service. Or if you've already got Zerto licenses and maybe you thought you would do this yourself and you've changed your mind, you can certainly start using those licenses and replicate that data to us without additional cost.
Nice. A question here is about the runbook. Essentially, who maintains that, and how does Bluelock, how do you all work together?
That's a great question. So a lot of people use Iron Mountain, and people would probably initially say that the value that Iron Mountain provides is the fact that they store your data off-site. And I would argue that the greatest value Iron Mountain provides is the fact that somebody's going to show up at your door every week or every other day or however often you do it and stand there until you give them backup data, right? So Bluelock is kind of like that. We are the ones driving the process around testing, the order of operations around the DR environment, and build, development, and management of the playbook itself. We call it a playbook, by the way, because it's actually got multiple plays in it. Runbooks typically will cover the failover event. We actually cover failover for full data center, failover for partial data center, failback, all sorts of different scenarios in there other than just a basic failover event. But we manage all of that, but it's completely transparent. So as you saw in the portal, you can come in, you can get your runbook, you can log into the collaborative extranet, make changes, adjust things. So you're free, you sort of have free access to as much of it as you want, but the responsibility of driving the process is on us.
And I think that's an important differentiator about Bluelock is it's not just a technology or a data center. You all kind of are offering a complete disaster recovery advice here, as well as runbook and those other services.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We operate it for you to the degree that you want us to.
Interesting. Nice. Okay. Well, I think that's the end of our time slot here. I really appreciate your presentation, Pat. Great insight into what Bluelock does, as well as your customers and how they have excelled using Bluelock services. So what should people do to find out more information or to get more information from Bluelock?
Yeah, so I would just go to our website, bluelock.com. There's a lot more information there, but there's also some great ways to connect to us, whether it's through Twitter, LinkedIn, or if you're after somebody specifically, or if you just want to reach out and talk to our engagement team. As you can probably tell, we take more of a consultative approach to the conversation. So if you just want to get on the phone and figure out whether we're not a fit based on what your priorities are, we're happy to guide you. And we can not only tell you what we've done for people, as you saw today, we can tell you about people who decided to take this on themselves, how that went, and a lot of them are successful with that as well. But what sort of was the tipping point to people deciding to do this as a service or not?
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Pat. I appreciate it.